So, just reiterating back kind of the advertisement for today's event that we are in a very divided climate. Political conversations can feel tense, unproductive, and even unsafe. We want to have open dialogue across differences of opinion, and I think that's important to a healthy democracy and thriving communities. And so today we're going to talk about the role of safety in political conversations, what it means, why it matters, and how it can be created. We're going to talk about what does safety even mean in the context of political dialogue, how can true understanding happen without it, and how do we balance honesty and respect while discussing deeply held beliefs, especially where we have different beliefs than the people we're talking with. And then what tools or practices can communities use to make political discussions safer and more constructive? You'll see I've already done a couple of those in my intro. So and I'll talk about them sort of more openly. And then this is basically going to be an interactive conversation, although I'm going to do it, it'll be a presentation and then discussion, but it'll be interactive. I don't know how long the presentation will take. But we'll jump through it in reasonable speed, I think. So first, there have been qualitative studies of what are called brave conversations within safe spaces. And so when participants basically use words like or phrases like "I want to invite correction" or "let me know if I got this wrong," other people tend to reciprocate that kind of openness. And so I think it's important to, yes, have a safe space, but also a safe space where people can be brave about what they say and feel like they can say something without being attacked or made fun of or bullied for their opinions. And that all starts from within, from us creating a sense that people will be safe in sharing their honest opinions and an eagerness to understand why someone came to those opinions, especially if we disagree with them. So when one person also shows that they're willing to be open to the fact that we might be wrong, then other people are going to be more open that they might be wrong too. And so I think it's important, and I always try to do that. And sometimes spend 5 or 10 or even more than that hours preparing for my presentations, but I'm always open that someone in the presentation, after the presentation, might point out flaws in the presentation. And I think that's important because even if I did a lot of research, that doesn't mean I know everything about everything. There's areas that I could be wrong too, right? So, and I think and that's actually, we have what we call the 6 intentions of the Freethinker Institute, which are our common values. And the second intention is to transparently share our beliefs with other people and to listen with an open mind when other people share their opinions with us. And I think that's really important to open and honest communication and a key part of tonight's topic. So, next is deliberative democracy research. There are a lot of communities where basically structured formats with small groups, balanced information, respectful moderation help people listen across different divides. I'd like to say that I think that we're one of them. Key aspects of deliberative democracy is about making space for everybody's voice, giving fair information, and designing the conversation carefully. Not pre pre-planning it per se, but because we don't like schedule dialogue, our Q&A is very authentic. But understanding that everybody should be able to have a voice and that we're respectful to each other and sharing our opinions is important. Um, So, psychological safety in organizational settings, there's been a lot of research on this. And when there's a sense of psychological safety, Simon Sinek talks a lot about this. People are more likely to speak up, admit mistakes, propose ideas, and push boundaries. There's also a lot of evidence that says trust and safety are deeply connected. So, people are more willing to take risks when they have the trust that others won't punish or shame them for taking those risks. That includes sharing political opinions that have historically been met with what I would actually openly say is bullying. I think a lot of the historical liberal response to things like racism and sexism and xenophobia was to say you're a bad person for your beliefs, not wait, but why do you have those beliefs in the first place, which is more of a Daryl Davis, the guy that got hundreds of he's the black jazz musician that got hundreds of KKK people to turn in their robes simply by asking them thoughtful questions. And I think the Daryl Davis approach is much better than the historical liberal approach, which is one of listening with empathy. And that's why we're having tonight's talk, is so that we can have a community where listening with empathy is core to what we do, rather than judging people for what we might believe are unsavory beliefs. Um, and I do think that, being racist and sexist and all these isms and phobias, I think they're unsavory beliefs. But I also want to understand, how did people come to them? Because I can tell you, like, some of the answers that Daryl got when he had asked those questions to KKK members were, that's just what everybody around me believed. Their whole community, their whole world, everyone believed those things. And so they didn't know that there was another way of thinking. And so I think it's important to listen to understand, and doing that creates that psychological safety to get people to speak up with an open mind, and they're going to be much more open to changing their mind if they're not cornered or bullied into, being told that they're a bad person for their beliefs, when really they may have a good reason for believing that in the first place, but they might equally well admit that there's a better reason for changing their mind, as long as they're met with psychological safety rather than with bullying. Um, so in political forums online, there's a lot of harsh and toxic comments that cause people to self-censor or leave the discussion completely. And so there are sort of hostile norms which discourage honest sharing. I like to say that text is the worst way to communicate. Really doing it like this, where we have, some of us have video on. I appreciate those of you on video, but I understand not everybody wants to be. That's okay. But it's nice to match the face and the name. And most communication is actually 80% is supposed to be nonverbal, which includes tone of voice. So we can at least get tone of voice when we're talking here, whereas in text, you can't get that. And sometimes things like sarcasm can be mistaken for actual intent, and someone who may be perceived as being the opposite of opinion of what they are. And communication is just very poor in that text-only world. And that is unfortunately a lot of how people communicate today, which is what I would argue is one of the reasons that we're in the most well-connected world, and yet there's a dearth of friendships all around the world, because relationships are strained because I think too many people are communicating too often in text. So the next time you have a tense text conversation with someone, pick up the phone, talk to them. Trust me, it helps. Then let's talk about, we're going to talk about different tools and strategies for creating safety in conversations. And I'm going to talk about, the tool strategy, why it helps, and what you can do about it. And we're going to go through a bunch of these. So first is to set clear norms and ground rules. People feel, less anxious when they know the rules of engagement. I did that at the beginning of tonight's session, and I've done that for a long time, even before I researched tonight's topic. We've been doing that because it just felt intuitively like the right thing to me to do. And I want to make sure that everything is on the table and that I'm communicating transparently and authentically. And at the beginning, we set the rules. Really, the only rule, and so this way it's not hard to remember, is to be polite. You can say whatever you want, and you can, as long as you say it politely, you're allowed to say it. And setting those expectations and proposing those rules upfront and transparently, I think is a good way to create safety in a conversation. Next is facilitation is important. So it's important for facilitators. Tonight I'm facilitating. Carl facilitates other nights. And next week, Michael Strasberg is going to be doing a presentation. And so as we facilitate, it's important to notice if someone's being shut down, or if one voice is dominating in the Q&A, and we want to gently step in, call for balance, pause the conversation if things get too heated, which I've done. It doesn't happen too often with the FTI, which I'm proud of, but when it does happen, I'm also proud that we step in and we try to calm things down and get everyone to try to listen a little bit more carefully, because tension usually means someone's not listening. I have what I call the modified platinum rule. The platinum rule is to treat other people the way they want to be treated, not the way you want to be treated, but to treat them the way they want to be treated, which I would argue is better than the golden rule. And when you treat someone the way they want to be treated, the one exception to that is unless there's a good reason not to, right? Someone says, well, give me all your net worth because I feel like having you do it. Well, I have a good reason not to do that, so I would actually decline to give my net worth to that person. But I think when I do use this with my kids whenever they get into a fight, I ask them if they're following the platinum rule, and the answer is always no, because if either one of them were following the platinum rule, they wouldn't be in a fight in the first place because one person would be giving in to the other. So that said, reflection and silent writing periods. This is something we don't usually do, but we kind of do it in a de facto way because we usually have a reasonable sized group. I guess we have what now, 36 people now. And so, if we have 36 people, like the idea here is to, not everybody speaks like off the cuff really well, and some people need quiet time. And so, in a large group, everybody kind of has their own alone time, but sometimes it's good to give people, a few minutes to just sit in quiet time and sort of percolate on things. So we may try that now and then as we host events. And I think giving people some quiet time to process things, especially if things do get heated, to have some reflection is good. I think with a large group, what I find is people who are quieter will just raise their hand when they're ready to speak. And so not everyone has to be speaking all the time. And so that's another sort of de facto way that we address this. Next is small groups and breakouts. We used to do small group breakouts in FTI events, and then I took surveys, and people actually liked staying in one big group. But I kind of thought that tonight might be an interesting time to experiment with having like a breakout room or two, and maybe like having some people be able to stay in the large group, and then other people be able to go to breakout groups. And so that kind of gives people more of a chance to voice their opinions that they may not get in the larger group because there are a lot of people, and some people may feel more comfortable in a smaller group being able to voice their opinions. So I might ask if Carl can, moderate at least one breakout session, and we might have some other volunteers moderate some breakout sessions if we want to do that in uh, the Q&A portion. So active listening and paraphrasing. So when someone hears you accurately, you're going to feel safer being willing to communicate authentically with them. And so the way to do this is to restate what you think you hear someone saying. And I would argue that this is the most important when you think someone's saying something that sounds absolutely crazy to you. You want to say, I think what you're saying is this. And I will tell you every time I do that, they're like, no, 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 that's not what I mean. Because when I say I think what you're saying is this, it's almost always something that it sounds kind of crazy. And so most people, when they hear it phrased back to them that way, they go, no, that's not what I mean. Now, sometimes I'm pretty confident they said that, but when they say that's not what they meant, like I have to take them at their word. And so I think it's important to phrase it back to people in the way that you perceived it so that they can at least hear how they were being perceived, and you can show whether or not you were actually hearing the way that they intended to be. And I would argue that the best way of rephrasing something back, which I'm still getting better at, is to try to empathize with the person and like really give them the biggest benefit of the doubt possible in the way that they said something and what their intentions are, that they have good intentions. Because I would argue almost everybody has good intentions. It's just that we all have also misunderstandings. And I have a little formula, which is evil is equal to good intentions plus misunderstanding. And so what that means is that everybody has good intentions, but if you have good intentions and a misunderstanding together, other people might perceive what you're doing as evil accurately, even. It's just that, it's the misunderstanding that's making you choose the wrong side. And I would argue that's true about political discourse on a regular basis, is that there are a lot of misunderstandings. And I even fell for one tonight, right? So with that fake Donald Trump quote. So um, Next is emotional check-ins and pulse moments to make sure that people feel comfortable and safe. And every once in a while, just checking in on people in the conversation and making sure everyone does feel comfortable and safe. So that's a good best practice. Um, if there are mistakes or missteps, then you want to repair any kind of harm and get back to a place of safety. So using kind of a timeout or like time to reflect, before returning back to the conversation, and encourage honesty about being hurt. I think using I feel statements is really good in this scenario, where you say, I feel safe when you share your opinions in a way that shows you're open to being wrong, even if we disagree about them, because you're inviting me to be able to share an opposing opinion, right? That's an I feel. The form of the statement is I feel X when Y because Z. And so I feel X when Y because Z. I feel like this when this happens because of this. And then you're explaining the emotional impact you have. And emotions are not always irrational. I would argue emotions always have a rational root cause. The thing that's usually irrational is what the emotions are compelling us to want to say and do. Like giving into your emotions and just doing what you emotionally feel like doing and saying, I would argue is usually bad. But if you actually dig to the root cause of why you're feeling those emotions in the first place, which is what the I feel statements get you to do, is they say why you're feeling those emotions, that's actually very valuable. Next is to highlight courage and vulnerable sharing. And so when people do take risks, and I've, regularly talked to some of our Trump supporters and the events here about how, I think that even though I think we do an exceptionally good job at creating an emotionally safe environment. I will say sometimes we get people that are very anti-conservative. We have a more of a liberal audience than we do a conservative audience, and so sometimes I think that the opinions are shared so strongly that it takes courage for some of the conservatives to speak up. And not just conservatives, but Trump supporters is usually where there's a conflict. Like traditional conservatives, I don't think there's really a lot of negativity around recently. But there is a lot of tension between Trumper or non-Trumper, and I appreciate the Trump supporters coming back and sharing their opinions authentically because I think it's important that understanding why they've chosen the loyalties that they have. If we don't understand why they've chosen the loyalties they have, how can we understand how we got to the point we're in now? And I think, someone in the early stages of in the social, gave their hypothesis. I gave a hypothesis similar to that when trying to explain why I think Trump got elected. But that doesn't really get to the root cause of why people in the first place might have those beliefs, right? And where did those beliefs come from? And that's where I think you have to ask why 5 times or maybe even more to get to the real root cause of the whys. Um, and I think telling people that we appreciate their courage and sharing their opinions is important. That doesn't necessarily mean we agree with them. It just means that in some groups where someone is a minority, whether it's a liberal or a conservative that's the minority, it always takes more courage to speak up when you're a minority. And I think it's important that that courage be recognized and appreciated. Um, Starting with low risk stories, I think, like and this is easier to do in small groups, but, talking about small differences and, talking about times when people have changed their minds about things. I often will ask people this question when I feel like I have a really good logical reason for like someone having a misunderstanding and that I've politely sort of asked questions that should have led them to realize that they have a misunderstanding. I sometimes will ask, well, when's the last time that you changed your mind about something that was really important to you? And some people can't think of a time. And that basically tells me that I'm not going to convince this person of anything. Because if they've never changed, they can't remember one time that they've changed their mind about something important. And I'm telling you, I can tell you about a ton of times that I've changed my mind about important things. I just did at the beginning of the session, right? That quote from Donald Trump. I was wrong about that, right? So that was it would have been an important quote if it was real, but actually what it showed is that left-wing, folks are now guilty of sharing fake news, just like right-wing folks are guilty of sharing fake news. And that's a dangerous place to be where we have fake news getting thrown from both the left and the right. I don't think it happens in equal quantities, but it is happening from both sides. And I think that's important to recognize. And so I think it's important for each of us to ask ourselves, can we think of a time where we changed our mind about an important thing? And if you can't think of one, then I would argue you should be questioning whether your mind is open enough to new ideas. Because we had a whole event in the FTI about confirmation bias, which is when you ignore all evidence that disagrees with your current opinions. And I would argue that confirmation bias is super strong in almost everybody, and it's the strongest in people who don't even know what it is and have never heard of it. And if you know what confirmation bias is, and I like to say, look for reasons you're wrong, not reasons you're right. When you're looking for only reasons you're right, you're suffering from confirmation bias. When you look for reasons you might be wrong, then your focus is to seek truth and to be fair, then you're going to be much more likely to be steered in the right direction by your own critical thinking. Um, so next is to rotate speaking order and include quiet voices. I sometimes like to, like if I see someone who hasn't spoken with their hand up, I will jump them ahead of someone who's already spoken two or three times because I want to have those quieter voices be able to speak their mind. Because I'll tell you, I've been in conversations where you have four people sitting around where, three of them are extroverts and they're all talk, 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 talk. And then the one person who hasn't spoken yet, like finally opens their mouth and they summarize everything in a neat bow and then come to a conclusion where no one else was able to do that. And so the introverts often have the most wise things to say if only you'll let them speak. And so I want to encourage introverts to please raise your hand when you have, valuable things to say. We're not going to put you on the spot and think that you always have the wisest thing to say. But, I do want to give introverts a chance to speak. Even though we're a large group, it's really important that introverts get heard, because introverts tend to be better assimilators. And I was an extreme introvert when I was younger, so I kind of have lived both sides. I'm now like slightly extroverted ambivert. But and we try to make that possible in the Q&A, in that we let everybody kind of jump in, but then introverts are less likely to jump into a conversation, which is why you can always raise your hand if you're an introvert and you want to speak up and start a new topic or even to respond. So this is what I call listening to understand. It's important to remember that dialogue is not a debate or a contest to win. It is a chance to listen and learn. It should be a chance to listen and learn with the goal of understanding. This brings to mind one of my favorite quotes, which is in disputes upon moral and scientific points, and this is from Arthur Martin, his 1866 Guide to the Art of Conversation. He said, "Let your aim be to come at truth, not to conquer your opponent. So you shall never be at a loss in losing the argument and gaining a new discovery." And I think what wisdom that he said this in 1866, and I don't think enough people quote it. And it's a great quote. So
Garrett, Garrett, sorry to interrupt.
yeah,
Let me in the spirit of being corrected, I
yeah,
actually that quote was attributed to someone else, and I did the deep research to make sure that I was wrong and you were right. But it's actually that's not the right person. It's James Berg, and he came way before, and he was a political philosopher. The person you attributed is just an etiquette writer.
okay.
Exact same words, but that's the right person that said that quote, and I love that quote too. That
It's a
really
good quote. So I got that from brain pickings, so I'm gonna blame them for my misunderstanding, but I'm glad you're correcting it. You corrected me on that a time before, and I still have it saved somewhere. So can you email me like the correct person so that I can put it in my notes correctly?
I'll put him in the chat
Don't put it
His
in
name
the
is
chat. Email me. So
yeah,
yeah, email me and then I'll get it processed correctly.
no
Um,
problem.
So next is that some people take more risk than others. So like different people, depending on your identity, background, past experiences, etc., don't want us to accidentally load more risk on people that are already feeling vulnerable. And so I think it's important that we be extra careful to balance that some people, because of their background, may feel more singled out by particular topics and situations. And so it's important to recognize that speaking openly and honestly is not as easy for everyone. And it comes harder for people who are particularly close to situations or the subjects of, um, negative vibes, we'll call it. So next is that rules just for show is like does not engender trust. So the rules that we talk about in terms of politeness need to be enforced across all people, including me, by the way. So if anyone feels I'm violating the rule of politeness, you're welcome to raise your hand and point it out. I also would ask moderators to point it out if you guys feel like I am, for my fellow moderators. But we all need to live by the rules. Otherwise, people will feel that it's not a fair environment. And in the FTI, if you'll remember when I talked about what we strive to do, it's to be always polite, be the best version of ourselves, to seek truth, and to be fair. And so being fair is one of our four North Stars in the FTI. And so it's important that we're all striving for that. And by the way, I'm very bad at self-promotion, but I'm going to put a Google Doc for people that want to learn more about the FTI. I'm going to put it in the chat so that if you want to learn more about the FTI and what it means to be a member, you can. And so I just put that in the chat. Um, and there we go. Okay. So next, I'm going to go through some, having feeling. These are some challenges. So having feelings isn't enough. We all need help expressing our feelings. You might feel safe enough to talk, but just not have the right words, the confidence, or the frame to say what's in your head clearly. So I try to give people openings. Then, sometimes when people, if you just try to speak your mind as best you can, I'll try to channel you, or other people will try to channel you, and we'll try to help each other by asking thoughtful questions and giving examples and clarifying and trying to empathize. Next is it's easier to build safety in small groups or in one session. Over time, it's harder to sustain, but we really try hard to do that in the FTI. It's not Safety isn't a one night thing, it's an ongoing practice. And if and we want that kind of safety to last in all of our events, or to be ever present in all of our events. And so I'm curious to hear from people if you feel like we have been doing that in FTI sessions, for those that are regulars or have been here before, even. I would love to hear feedback about whether or not you feel like we've been succeeding there. Um, and um, and just one second. So next, actually, I would love feedback about out of these things that I just talked about, if people can write in the chat which of these things you feel like we do well in the FTI and which we could do better. I would love to get kind of a you know, feedback about which of these things we do well and which ones we could do better. And that said, I'm going to go to Q&A and conversations, and I want to give the rules transparently in Q&A. And so basically, you want to limit comments and questions to one comment or question per time that you raise your hand, and limit the length of that comment or question to 2 or 3 minutes. If you want to respond to what anyone just said, whether it's me, the person who spoke, or anyone else, you can just jump in, but keep it to under 20 seconds so that we can stay on like a quick sort of popcorn, round robin conversation on the same topic of whoever raised their hand. And then once that conversation dies down, we'll go to the next hand up. So that said, Dr. DeLuca, your hand is first. You should be able to unmute now.
Yeah, try now.
Okay, now I can. Thank you. I was just
Yep.
typing that you have to unmute me. Well, Garrett, thank you very much. And yes, you shared this with me beforehand earlier today, and I appreciate laying this out. What I wanted to point out was, my experience working with an NGO and with the city of New York, where we try our best in our day-to-day work to avoid anything where people might be getting too politically, vocal about things, and but making sure that everyone feels valued and heard. And in my job, I'm not offended when someone makes a correction or goes a different way. We feel like we're arriving at the best result as a team. But when again it comes to political discourse, it's like people feel like they're dug in with having to defend their political point of view. And that's where it gets difficult. And we, for me, I realize that every day I make mistakes and I get things wrong. And so I have to come from a place of humility where I know that what I say I may truly believe, but someone else may have a different point of view, and that too can be valid. And she or he might be right, and I'd be wrong. It's not easy to practice humility. For the most part, as a lawyer, you're coming from the point of view where you want to stand up for your client's rights and be right about that, and the other side must be wrong. But when you come from it from a place of humility, like I run meetings for an NGO, it's a 501(c)(3. We have to avoid being perceived even as leaning one way or the other, supporting one party or a candidate over another. And so, even though we have a wide range of people participating in this, we do it in a way that we're not tipping off who we favor. And that's not easy to do. And so, with that having been said, I think it's helpful to have this kind of dialogue about how we each try to address this issue without getting too emotional, too upset, and not being able to listen and hear each other. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And in fact, I did a whole event. We had a night dedicated to where I tried to make the argument, and I think I made a good argument that all preventable harm actually has at its root cause egotism or a lack of humility. So I think that humility is super important. And I basically made just to just quickly summarize is that in Buddhism, they say that all suffering comes from anger, greed, and misunderstanding. And I would argue the root cause of anger, greed, and misunderstandings actually is rooted in egotism in one way, shape, or form. And so I think really it all comes from egotism. So remembering to be humble. And there's also a great book that I recommend to people out of the over 700 book summaries I've read on Blinkist. This is one of the best ones. I think it's called Humility is the New Smart. And I think it's just so enlightening to say that until we're humble, we don't learn new truths. And that's where confirmation bias is kind of when our egotism keeps us rooted in our current beliefs rather than finding new truths. So can't agree with you more, Stephen. Just trying to sort of say it in different ways. Sarah, go ahead.
Oh, hey, I just wanted to add a little bit to what you guys were saying with that, the humility part. I think, well, first off, sorry, I'm all over the place with my thoughts. I want to go back to the beginning when you were talking about psychological safety and talking about biases. And I think it's really important for like you guys are talking about the humility, but I think what happens is with a lot of people, they don't like you or Garrett were talking about how people don't have the awareness for confirmation bias. And I think it's really, really important for people because we all have biases, right? Like every single one of us has biases. It's just being able to take like a pause or somewhere in there. And for me, it's like, how do you get to that place, or can you help people get to a place where they're just taking a pause, I guess you could say, and their awareness, or asking possibly like more thoughtful questions that can get them to a place where they can talk about or get to a place where they can talk about their biases in a way that's not that is humble, or where that is, you have that humility behind it, because, just pointing out people's biases, obviously they're not going to like that.
Yeah.
But I think yeah, I just think I love what you guys are talking about with that. And for me, it's hard. I think you just really have to go deeper, and like, how do you get there? I had recently been with a group in person, and so me and this person did not see eye to eye at all on this subject matter, and we got into it, and we both got pretty emotional. But what I loved about what happened is that we both decided to just sit and talk it out. And it wasn't like, oh, we're getting emotional, let's be embarrassed, that we're getting emotional. We sat through it and we decided to just talk it out. We got to a place where we just like calmed down a little bit. And then I realized, which I want to point this out too, that maybe Garrett, maybe this is something you could add to your presentation, is that framing things, suggestive framing. So one of the reasons I was upset at him is because a lot of the stuff that he would talk about, a lot of the evidence he would talk about, he would use suggestive framing, like this, whatever I'm bringing up is correct, and it's incredible. Like, so I mean, that's not a great example, but I guess you can kind of see what I'm saying. Like, suggestive framing is like you're basically throwing out suggestions whenever you throw up evidence or talk about your opinion. So, and a lot of people don't catch that. And I noticed, like, it took a while for us to get to that point to where I really understood what he was saying. I was like, well, can you frame it? Like, don't say it like that. Like, don't say that you are an authority on this subject when you aren't. And I think that a lot of people, for me, it's like I had a very authoritative father. So it's like, if you can frame it in a way that's not authoritative. Sorry, Kyle. Yeah, I'm taking up a lot of time. Okay, anyways, yeah, just framing. I think it's really important for people to frame, like, and not be suggestive in the way that they frame, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think framing from a coming from a place of humility is a good place of starting and trying to look at sometimes it's good, and we did this in classes when like in school where we would try to take the other person's point of view and try to put yourself in their shoes and try to understand their perspective well enough that you can rephrase it back to them to understand their perspective. I also while I agree there are hundreds of types of bias, so I have a little sort of joking way of saying the only people with no bias are the ones that are too egotistical to recognize their bias, because we all have bias, like we do. Like
Right,
we all have
right,
even confirmation bias.
right,
Everyone has
right.
confirmation bias. And so, but I do think you're
Yeah.
right that, and I've tried pointing out to people, I think you may have confirmation bias here, and they don't like that very much. I think the better way to do it is to ask, thoughtful questions
Questions.
that might
Yeah.
help them realize where their bias is coming from and sort of help them discover the bias for themselves. Because when people correct themselves, it's non-confrontational.
Right.
When you try to correct someone, most people see that as confrontational. Although I will give everybody something to aspire towards, if you can hear someone point out where you're wrong logically and just agree with them and say, you know what, thanks for pointing that out. That was helpful. That's a good place to be. So, um, I think that's a good thing to strive for, but you can't assume that the person you're talking with is like that, because there's a very small percentage of people that are in that camp. So thanks, great point, Sarah. I do think the framing is important. Bart, go ahead.
I hope I don't offend you here, Garrett, and let me know if my I'm cutting out. I have bad internet connection, so just let me know.
Yeah.
You know, when I hear safe space, I it's well, to me that says that there are topics and opinions that are off limits. Some topics or opinions on a topic will make people uncomfortable, and so you shouldn't say them. That's kind of where this safe spaces lead to. And I don't think people who really want to interrogate the truth, let's say politically, um, these uh, that they're not serious about apprehending the truth. If you're having couples counseling where things are very vulnerable, that's kind of different. But I mean, we're just talking about politics and ideas and how to govern a country and how to, govern a world and yada yada. And so when I hear safe spaces, I just kind of like shrug and say, okay, these people don't really want to have a serious conversation. And to the thing that you said there, Garrett, about the modified platinum rule,
Hmm.
treat people how they want to be treated.
Hmm.
Um, if you do that too often, you can just get people living in an echo chamber where they just hear what they want to hear. And if you don't challenge people and kind of say things that, I mean, maybe there's an actual truth that they don't want to hear. And so, to treat them how they want to be treated, I think some people need to hear some tough love and
Hmm.
need to hear some harsh truth. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think you can force someone to have an open mind. You can't force them, right? So I think also most people, if you ask them, hey, are you open to different perspectives? Almost everybody will say yes. So I think if you treat them the way they want to be treated, I think most people will say they want to be treated in such a way that they would hear something and I've asked lots of people about the FTI's first intention, which is to be the best version of yourself, to be polite, to seek truth, and to be fair. And on the right and the left, everybody agrees that that's a good thing to strive for. And so I think when I say treat people the way that they want to be treated, it includes seeking truth and being fair. So it doesn't mean to feed someone's confirmation bias. I do agree with you that some people will just feed confirmation bias, but we may disagree about who's doing that more than not. But I also think, when you hear safe space, I think you hear it as a politically loaded term because the right talks about and sort of ridicules the idea of safe spaces. Whereas when I use the term safe space, I'm not using the version of the safe space that's ridiculed by the right. What I'm using is what I call the brave space, which is a safe space where everybody can feel comfortable being brave, where you, Bart, can say, you know what, I like Mr. Trump and this is why I like him. And even if 9/10 of the people here are liberal, if someone tries to make fun of you for that, I'm going to defend you and I'm going to say, no, that's not acceptable here. We're all allowed to express our opinions, and we may not agree with someone, but everybody's welcome to express their opinions openly and honestly here, as long as it's done politely. And hopefully, Bart, you felt like, you're now a regular. So I hope you feel like we do have a place where you feel comfortable speaking your mind. And I hope that all people with all opinions will feel comfortable speaking their mind here. We've gotten some pretty unusual opinions. I had a guest that said that like divorce should be illegal in 100% of cases. And like that, think about that. That includes like spousal abuse, physical and sexual assault, like all of these cases that it should be. And no one ridiculed them for saying that. People asked questions about when is this appropriate, when is it not appropriate. But um, all I'm saying is that I think there's a difference between the uh, the straw man argument of the safe space and then the actual implementation of a safe space in the FTI. And all I'm
Well,
asking, go ahead.
Well, it's okay. Well, I would just ask you, have you heard of any conservatives or libertarians, centrists that would like to have a safe space to discuss things? It's always progressives, and so I don't know. I think it's not. I don't know. It's a strike against progressives. That's all I'm saying, man.
No,
Um,
I've
let me,
definitely had conservatives talk to me about that, and in fact, the whole impetus for this event came from a conservative to
if
have
I can jump in,
discussion.
Garrett, just
Please,
for very briefly,
yeah.
what I see it from might be a conservative point of view would be that the safe space concept is used to silence people who disagree with you because you say, "Oh, you're making me feel unsafe. You can't say that." And rather, I think what we're getting at is we should all feel safe enough to express our opinions, even though someone else may be deeply offended by that, but we're doing it in a polite way. We're not, yes, if we have political discourse, people may be offended by what we say, but we can't have an honest discourse if we're not risking to do that. And
Yeah.
that's the point of view that I'm coming from.
Yeah, and I think Trask actually, and I don't usually read the text, but Trask said it really well, is that the reason it should be safe is that no one should be attacked, ridiculed, or made to feel bad for expressing their opinion. The most that someone should feel is that they're asked questions that they don't have good answers to. And if the truth is someone is able to ask you questions that you don't have good answers to, you might want to think twice about the actual opinions that you have in the first place. Because if you can't answer why you have them with a really good, solid response, then maybe they're not good beliefs to have in the first place.
Yeah, that's what a debate is. We challenge each other's ideas and poke and prod and
Well,
right.
there's different approaches. So instead of poking and prodding and trying to tear down someone else's idea, we can ask them thoughtful questions that help them try to defend their idea.
Yeah,
And if
that's
they're
what I
not good
mean.
at, and so that's what we try to do in the FTI is to ask thoughtful questions and listen with empathy to why that person believes differently than us. And it's a different approach than the debate approach.
And the last thing we'll say is that none of us change our minds in one conversation. It's usually over, and it takes time to
Yeah,
actualize the thing. And then, oh, you talk to someone else, and 6 months later, you know what? I was actually wrong 6 months ago, and now I can see that. But so anyway, that's all.
yeah. I would
I've
say the
changed my
word
mind in actual conversations.
I do
I
too.
change my mind
So
every day. I
yeah,
realize I make mistakes every day. And Garrett and I had a conversation 3 weeks ago, and we had a discussion, and we changed our minds about something, and that's fine. That's what the conversation should be about. If we're open to it, then it's not a place of being humiliated because you're right or wrong. It's a place of just coming from humility and saying, all right, neither one of us is necessarily right or wrong, but let's come up with the right answer. Let's come up with the best answer or the best product.
right. And I would agree, Dr. DeLuca, you and I probably do that, but I also think we're probably the rare exception, and Bart is usually right that most people take weeks or months or sometimes just never change their minds. They're just gonna, go to their grave with their current beliefs and their confirmation bias. But I would argue that it's always good to strive for seeking truth and seeking to be fair. And if our goal is to seek truth and to be fair, we don't feel bad about changing our mind because what we did is get closer to truth, and that was what the not Arthur Martin quote that I thought was Arthur Martin is about seeking truth rather than seeking to be right.
Discussion raged on.
Carl, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to, great presentation, by the way.
Thanks.
Add a couple of resources that go further into this topic. One of them actually is the protocol for safe conversations, which is nonviolent communication by Marshall Rosenberg. This is something I used to have a girlfriend that worked for the state, and they train heavily in this protocol. And then another thing is street epistemology, which is also a protocol for discussing unsafe topics when somebody actually might disagree with you. And it's videotaped, so you can actually see examples of conversations that you would think would actually degenerate into negativity, but it's really pleasant, polite. And the reason for that is because the interviewer is his only aim is just to understand why someone believes what they believe. And that gets us into the sense that's what everybody wants, speaking of the platinum rule, right? Everybody wants to be understood, heard, and seen, and feel safe, and feel like nobody, sometimes going to throw homonyms at you. And so street epistemology, I'll put that in the chat, and nonviolent communication.
Yeah,
Um, if but you're right. I think the moment you realize, you can tell right away in a conversation where someone is aiming for truth rather than victory, right? It's a sense they just want to win the argument. They want to be right, and they, you can tell they're not going to change their minds, and they're not even listening. They're just waiting for their chance to respond and to give you another argument to try to convince you, and you don't see that change. So yeah, seek truth, not victory.
yeah, and those
Live by
people are
that motto.
listening to respond instead of listening to understand, And I would argue that's the norm, quite frankly. That's how most people interact most of the time. The vast
Yeah.
majority, I would go so far as to claim, um, and I would argue it's the opposite of what we should be doing. We should really be vast majority listening to understand rather than listening to respond. Um, okay, Barone.
Thanks.
Thanks, Carl. And oh, by the way,
Um,
I did read Nonviolent Communication. I read that was one of the some 700 something books on Blinkist that I listened to.
Oh, good. Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
it's a classic.
yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
Okay, Barone, sorry.
No problem. Um, I think for one thing, I think it's really is creating a lot of difficulty in life. Like I live in New Jersey, I work in Manhattan, and this concept of treat people how they want to be treated. This is very much like a city vibe. This is something that's very much present in New York City. Where I live in New Jersey, this is not the way of being, right? And I think it's really damaging. That's what I've seen in my experience in management. There's a lot of people that come and go, a lot of, younger people. And, my experience, my firsthand, knowledge of the situation, like this is so much of a conversation, like even talking about things like pronouns, right? One person is mad if you ask pronouns, another person is mad if you don't ask pronouns, and it's just creating so much tension and so much conflict, this idea of treat others how they want to be treated, because we interact with new people every day all the time, and we can't possibly be expected to know how each person we're meeting wants to be addressed. And I hold myself responsible for correcting someone if they don't address me how I would like, right? Then I would take that on myself and say, hey, you know what? When you're talking to me, would you mind referring to me this way, right? If that's important to me, I'm going to say so. But I'm not going to get mad for someone who doesn't know me or doesn't interact with me regularly for not addressing me the way I want. That's not going to be something I find offensive. When it comes to things like the safe space, I think that creates a lot of a lot of a lot of dramatics too. Because for me, if I'm hearing safe space, um, for me, I'm thinking safe versus dangerous, right? So I'm thinking, do I feel safe? Like, do I feel that I am not in any imminent danger where I will be attacked? And maybe part of this is, being female to some degree, right? Like maybe that's part of why I'm thinking that way, but I'm not thinking of, am I going to disagree with another person? That's not what I'm thinking of as safe or not space for me. But on the same way, I will say that if there's like a family gathering and I'm the one hosting, I will be that person that will say, like, this is what we're doing. We're not talking about politics. Off the table. Because you're in my space, we're going to play by my rules. And when I'm in your space, I will play by your rules. But I come to things like this, right, to have that dialogue, to have that debate and that discussion. But I also feel like I can choose to not participate in certain surroundings, right? If I know what's going on, I'm going to choose to either go and participate or stay home and don't do it, right? And that's the power I have to choose my action and how I respond to things. So I'm going to just worry about owning myself. That's my thought.
So, out of curiosity, do you think most people follow the platinum rule?
I don't know. I can't speak for everybody. I can only
You
speak for
you
for
said that
me.
you
And
you said that you feel like people following the platinum rule is causing a lot of conflict and tension. And I would say I think probably less than 1% of people really try to follow the platinum rule. I would say less than 1% of people have even heard of the platinum rule, let alone try to follow it.
well, my experience has been that it's not helpful. I would prefer to say everybody should treat others how they want to be treated, right? How I want to be treated, I will treat you how I want to be treated
Why?
because I know how I want to be treated. I
Right.
don't know you and your feelings.
But you can, as you get to know someone, you can learn what their feelings are. So I think starting with the golden rule is good. But, for example, I like when people speak Spanish to me. ¿Quieres que hablo español a ti? Si hablo español a ti, no vas a saber qué estoy diciendo. And now I'm just turning everyone off by speaking Spanish to you all, even though I want to be spoken Spanish to. So clearly the golden rule falls flat when I want to be spoken Spanish to and I start speaking Spanish to a bunch of people who don't speak it. So I need to speak to you guys in the language that I think you're going to want me to speak, which presumably I'm going to think English. So I spoke English starting from the beginning, even though I don't know you all intimately. I know that you want to speak English with me because the advertisement was in English. So there are certain things that you can presume about people if you want to treat them the way that they want to be, that you think they want to be treated. And then what's important is that you course correct. If you learn that that's not how someone wants to be treated, you change and you change course and you make your goal be to try to treat them the way that you realize now that they want to be treated. And I think you pointed to that, Kay, is like, if you learn something different about someone, then you course correct. And I think you pointed to that in your own response. But I think that you might, does that make sense, first of all?
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, that is what I said,
Yeah.
right?
And so I
So
think
yeah.
we're agreeing. It's just that what you said is actually following the platinum rule. You said you were against the platinum rule, but then you went on to say that no, were you not against
I
the
think
platinum?
it's the opposite. And actually, I raised my hand to respond to this. So if I'm hearing you correctly, Garrett, I think that you started liking the golden rule, and then you elevated your understanding that the platinum rule was better
Yes.
with the reason part of it.
Right.
Uh, I also kind of had that, but the more I thought about the platinum rule, actually connects with what Ms. Barone is saying, which is this. Um, you cannot, so let's use the example of the Spanish, for example.
Hmm.
The platinum rule would work when you know what the person likes or how they want to be treated. It has to be verbally, so it only works in intimate situations,
No, because
friends.
I knew you wanted me to speak English to you. We didn't discuss
Yeah,
it.
but
It was
I
just,
know that
I
speak.
just knew.
How do I know that you want to be spoken in Spanish?
Do you think that I believe you want me to yell at you or belittle you?
Okay, so you're making a guess
Yeah, I'm
as to
making a guess at like how people want to be treated. Does
right.
anyone want to be yelled at or verbally abused?
Of
Probably
course,
not. So the platinum
right.
rule says, but you know what? Some people, and I've met people like this that go, you know what? That's how I roll. I verbally abuse people and I can dish it out and I can take it. And so everyone else should have to do the same because that's how I want to be treated. I should be able to treat everyone else that way too. And I'm saying no.
Right. That's a
You have to understand how other people want to be treated. And if you
And Garrett, may I point out one thing?
Sure.
Both Miss Barone and Carl have been trying to get you to understand from their point of view, and you're still trying to convince them of your point of view. So maybe what you ought to do is listen a little bit
Yeah,
more.
because I wasn't finished yet. Yeah, I was going to say, Garrett, that oh, no,
You're breaking up, Carl.
sorry. Can you hear me okay
Yeah,
now?
go ahead.
I actually got excited about the platinum rule. Then I'm thinking of it more. I realized, okay, there's two levels. There's a level of how you treat everyone, including strangers, which is the golden rule, but it's not the positive golden rule. It's the negative golden rule. Negative golden is think for yourself how you do not want to be treated and don't treat others that way. That's the negative golden rule. Okay. Think about how you don't want to be treated. Like don't be hurt, don't be yelled at, whatever. And don't treat others. That covers everybody. Now, in the platinum rule, as you get closer to someone, of course, you want to know them deeper. Of course, you're going to ask them, how do you want to be treated? And that's the platinum rule. So I think golden rule for 90%, including strangers, because you cannot know what a stranger wants unless you talk to them, unless
Don't
you get to know them.
aren't you essentially following the platinum rule by simply assuming that, you're assuming how that you think that person wants to be treated by following the negative golden rule. So essentially you are by de facto following the platinum rule by following the negative golden rule. You are. Because you're
Because
saying
it's
I don't want to be treated this way, therefore I'm going to not treat other people that way. So you're presuming how you should treat the other people and how you should not treat them.
no, because it's an omission. It's a non-action that's safe to me. It's a
That's still,
non-action
yeah,
as
that's
opposed
so you're
act
saying
positive.
you're saying not treating someone is different than the way that you treat them.
The negative, yes. In
So
other words, think about all the sources of conflict, like
mhm.
the Ten Commandments or whatever. You kind of have a list of 20
Those
things
aren't
that
a
people
good
suffer.
example. Like not use the
At the head,
Lord's name in vain as one of the Ten
so
Commandments. So
come up with five, six, seven things, right, that are considered people suffer from the hand of another, right? I once heard that 99% of conflicts in the world are caused by interpersonal relationships. Like it's other people are causing them, right?
it's
So if you take a moment, if every single person on earth takes a moment to think how they do not want to be treated, right? Like let's say they're about to punch someone, they go, "Oh, I don't like to be punched, so I'm not going to punch." And you think that across the board, you're going to eliminate 90% of conflict from the negative of the golden rule. And it's irregardless of how someone to be treated. Now, I'll finish by adding that the platinum rule, like the way when you said, "Oh, I want to be spoken in Spanish, so I expect everyone to speak within reason." The sense of it almost like reeks of entitlement. Like I want to be admired. I want to be petted. I want to be given money. Even if it's non-reasonable or reasonable, whatever, it feels like it's kind of almost self-centered, or you know what I mean?
wait,
So
you're
that's why
saying
I've
because I like to have people speak Spanish to me, I'm self-centered?
no, because you live in the country, for example, right? You live in United States, right? So wanting to be spoken in Spanish feels like a luxury to me, right? It's an entitlement, even though it feels good and
Actually, these
right.
days it can get me thrown in a concentration camp. So, it's really not a luxury per se. It's a thing that takes, I speak with a pretty good accent. So, I could be thrown in a concentration camp too. US citizens are going there. I think that you're presuming that when I talk about the platinum rule, that I am immediately imagining everybody as a mind reader and immediately knows how everyone wants to be treated. And that's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that you should do your best effort to understand how other people want to be treated and treat them accordingly based on what you know. And you're saying the same thing. You're just using the negative golden rule to do it. But really, we're saying the same thing. We're just calling the rules different names. And all I'm saying is that, if you know that someone likes certain things and as you get to know them better, you should treat them in ways
Right.
that are conducive to, the way that they want to be treated. And,
I agree.
if you don't know them,
That's the
then if you don't know them, then you have to take your best guess at how you think they want to be treated. And you're saying use the negative golden rule to do that, but I'm saying when you do that, you're using the platinum rule as well.
I think in practical real life, I think the platinum rule is not feasible for strangers. There's no way you can, unless you ask them. If every stranger you meet just says, "Hey, how would you like to be treated?"
No,
Okay,
again, I think we're not being productive here.
okay.
I'm saying that we're saying the same thing. Like the negative golden rule when you treat people is still using the platinum rule. It's just a subset of the platinum rule.
Can I make
Nah,
a suggestion that we just move on?
Yeah, I
yeah,
think so.
go ahead.
Santiago, go ahead.
Agree to disagree.
Thanks.
Agree to disagree.
Thank you.
Thanks, Garrett. I think I just wanted to add something on that, and then I will gonna move on to my points. So there is a concept of inherent respect, in which I think we will have to treat other people or even strangers in certain degree of decency according to the cultural norms that we of the surroundings we are in. So I guess like that's in that degree I agree with what you're saying, Garrett, because I feel like when we started to ask how they wanted to be treated, it will now gonna go to the way of having that earned respect from inherent respect. So and I just have like a comment regarding the or mostly probably not a comment, but just a question, because I usually go in these meetups because I feel like I wanted to make sense of how how the US, for example, is interconnected in my home country, in the Philippines. And I brought up some topics before that is somehow makes the country related here. And and some of them is when there are American bases that have been or American soldiers that have been deployed here, and then they started to build like 11 bases here, military bases, in order to support Taiwan if the conflict between China and Taiwan would exacerbate, and also between the conflict between the Philippines and China. And then I am also particularly interested before about the US aid, because I believe that there are some projects that the US aid have been supporting here in the Philippines, but have been pending because of that. However, in certain degree, I am also trying to understand that due to the fact that my own government is also corrupt, I sometimes feel that probably it has been like the right move to do to pull out the funding. And another one that I thought that make the US more connected to the Philippines is the recent bill that they are proposing, or I believe that it already has been passed, is like to keep the call centers in America bill, which will gonna be or already affecting a lot of Filipinos working in BPO industry. So my question would be, how keen the Americans, or at least like the people here in the group, in hearing these viewpoints, because this is not directly related to you, and it's not like in the locality, and also because there are a lot of problems that you guys might be encountering in your own cities, that probably these kind of issues might not always be an interest, since this is outside. However connected it is to the country, and however it might disrupt certain industry at some point in the country. And the reason why I ask is because there are times that I feel like there has been like I do not sometimes I do not feel heard when I'm bringing that up, but I also just like trying to understand that probably there are other reasons that might hold hold the people to be listening on these kind of topics when it's not directly related to them. And I guess yeah, so I guess like I'm just gonna finish there and hear what some of you or you, Garrett, have to say. Thanks.
Sure. So, couple of things. I wasn't familiar with the Keep Call Centers in America Act. It has not been passed as I understand it. Um, but I guess the I think I hope that you're learning a little bit more about there's not really a U.S. perspective on the Philippines or a U.S. perspective on China. There's every individual citizen has their own perspective on these topics. And so it becomes very complicated and nuanced. And I know that's not an easy answer, and we all love easy answers, right? But usually the easy answers are the wrong ones. I think the the one thing I would maybe pick a nit with, I understand you're, seeing the corruption in your government and then wanting to say maybe it was good not to give US aid to the Philippines, but I would take a different perspective on that and just say actually the US aid was meaningful. It just shouldn't have been given to the government to dole out to people. It should have been given to not-for-profits that were actually going to use the money in a more productive way than paying contractors ridiculous amounts of money so that their social media influencer children could flaunt it on social media to all the Filipino citizens and show how corrupt the government was, right? Which is what happened recently in the Philippines, as I understand it from one of my team members there. So, I do think that USAID was very valuable, and we had another event on that. And USAID was saving lives all over the world and was the only real form of soft power that the US had, and it was a very effective one. And it brought so much more influence than the very, tiny fraction of the budget. I think it was 0.7% of the budget that went to USAID, and it created a huge positive reputation for the US internationally. So I wouldn't be so quick to criticize the USAID funding. I would just say maybe the way that the money was spent, if it was going directly to the government, I don't know if it was in the Philippines, might not have been the right approach. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't think that I'm particularly um criticizing the US aid as much as I'm criticizing my own government,
Mm,
because I feel like it's more of like in the end that the corruption has been like I believe that like the intentions of US aid is more good, and like yeah, it's helping a lot of people in in the underdeveloped and developing countries, but the potential for that to be misused is really high as well when um, the government is corrupt. And I guess one of the reasons why I brought that up as well is because those are like the things that I wanted to make sense instead of me just uh we are like putting a finger into like the people that should not be how you call that, should not be accountable on that. And because there are, of course, as you mentioned, like there I think humans, or we like to make shortcuts in our brain, and when there are some hearsay regarding, oh, so for example here in the Philippines, so when they said that, oh yeah, it's the US, there are instances that probably my fellow Filipino will gonna be started to hold grudge against the US for pulling these kind of projects that might have, or funding that might have been helping us. And I do not want to be contained in that kind of thinking. That's also the reason why I am attending these kind of meetups, because I do not want to be only looking at one side. And so I guess like my intent is more of also just like to expand my horizons and have some nuances on really what's happening, because especially like the call center bill, they will gonna be there are a lot of layoffs now, especially in call centers. And also when the earthquake happened here 2 weeks ago, that's one of like the things that they are considering, that probably it's better to pull out to all of the call centers here, because it seems like, or also just like to have like a better reform on that, because it seems like a lot of call centers are more concerned on their profit when when the earthquake happened, and the employees decided to leave the building because it's considered not safe for them to stay and continue working. They were asked to return to work the next day, because they said that like their work has been, or the calls are being piled up. And for me, I guess like that is also something that I wanted to shed a light in some consumers. But like in one of our groups, I'm not saying that it is here in your group, Garrett, but like I heard a pushback from one of them, because like they said that like, what is the point of knowing all these things, how uh, happening in underdeveloped countries, when you as Americans will not gonna be able to like change it. So like, and that how much it will gonna affect their mental health if I will gonna be bringing up these points. So I guess like that's just my points there. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So I do think it's really good that you're looking for different perspectives and open-minded to those different perspectives. I think it's also important to, make sure that the perspectives that you're listening to, that you vet them and make sure that they hold water. I mean, the using the example of, well, there was an earthquake in the Philippines and therefore people couldn't go to work and therefore we shouldn't have call centers in the Philippines. um, you know, you could make the same argument for California, which has earthquakes all the time. And so maybe we shouldn't have, and then in the Southeast, we have hurricanes and we lose power there. And, even in the Northeast, we have hurricanes. And then in the Midwest, we have tornadoes. There are natural disasters no matter where you live in the world. There's some kind of natural disaster almost everywhere. So, using natural disasters as a reason not to have call centers in the Philippines is not a logical argument that holds water or holds up to scrutiny, in my opinion. I think that it's important to recognize that um, there's a lot of value in diversifying a workforce. But if a company is going to save a huge amount of money by having a call center in the Philippines and they want to be sure they have no downtime in the case of a natural disaster in the Philippines, they need a disaster recovery center and a backup plan, right? And they would need that for a US call center too. And I worked for the disaster recovery. I helped deal with the disaster recovery at GE's Treasury when I was at GE. Like there, you always need to have a backup plan if you don't want to end up being surprised. And that's true whether your call center's in the US or the Philippines or anywhere else in the world. Um, Thanks, Jenna. Dr. DeLuca.
Oh, you can call me Steve. It's okay.
Okay. Steve, go ahead.
Jenna, I did want to respond to what you were saying. I actually had been to the Philippines. I was in the Navy, and I actually had a girlfriend in high school who was from the Philippines, and so I can understand um, the Filipino point of view. I actually have friends today who are from the Philippines. Um, when I first went over there in the mid 80s, it was when they were having elections, and our aircraft carrier, the one I was on, was stationed off the coast of the Philippines in case something went south. And that was just because of the potential for political corruption and someone trying to take over the elections and perhaps having rioting and things like that. Um, a lot of ways we interacted with the people from the Philippines, where actually people who worked for me on board my ship were from Filipino. and they earned American citizenship by serving in the Navy. What I think what you touched on that kind of struck me was that here in America, we don't necessarily understand the impact of what we might say is policy and how that impacts people, say, in the Philippines or elsewhere. We don't really sense it or understand it unless we've been there or know someone who's there. It's hard to have solidarity with someone that you have no connection with. We don't always think it through. And for me, it's more like can it be a cultural thing? Can it just be something else that we cannot seem to understand each other? That's actually what my dissertation was about, cultural protectionism, feeling the need to protect one's culture from the dominance of another culture. If we're building all these bases in the Philippines, how are we overcoming and overwhelming the culture of the Philippines? I was there when we had Civic Bay and the one other base there. And things changed. We pulled out and we're back in again. But I think the important thing for our discussion is how do we relate to people that are literally on the other side of the world from us? We might not have the same cultural understandings as they do. And we don't understand how policy here really directly impacts people there. You know, a lot of people are going to lose jobs if this bill is passed. And we may think, oh, we're protecting American jobs, but we're also putting a lot of people out of work in the Philippines. I've seen that happen in other places as well. I think what it brings for us, our discussion from a 10,000 foot point of view is how can we relate to each other if we don't first seek to understand each other? If we don't understand what Jen is going through and what the Philippines are going through, how can we relate to that and understand the impact of what we're doing here? Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's great that you're listening, Jenna, and I hope that more Americans are also doing the same thing and, listening to global perspectives. I think the US is in some respects seen as an anomaly by a lot of the world these days, for the place that we are politically right now. And so I think it would be useful if more Americans sort of could see a more global perspective and how we're viewed from outside of the US. I got that feeling, I got that perspective when I lived abroad in Spain as an exchange student, and it was pretty eye-opening. I got to see a very different side of the US than I saw growing up in what I call the US bubble. And we do have a bubble here of a halo effect of the way that our education system, we teach American exceptionalism and we teach that America is the best, rah, rah, rah. And I was the same way when I went over there. And then people were like, oh, no, the US does a lot of really bad stuff. And I was like, what? We do? No, we don't. And then I researched it and then I started reading Noam Chomsky, and that was a dark couple of books. Oh man, depressing stuff, but like really important if you want to be a truth seeker. That said, I want to let Liz go.
I wanted to first thank Jenna for being here. I really appreciate her wanting to step outside and understand, as best she can, just like I'm trying to do. I did not even know that the Philippines had many call centers that were connected to the United States. I had no idea of that. And I will say that those companies are going to do what makes them the most money. And so unless there is a bill that says that they have to relocate to the United States, I doubt very much that they would. I'm enjoying this discussion. I really am. It's opening my eyes and my mind. And I want to thank you, Garrett, for presenting these. And I will say, about meeting someone where they are. When I used to work, I worked for the electric utility, the biggest one in New Jersey, and I spent many years working in Newark. And occasionally I would have someone come up to me and just start speaking to me in Spanish. And that always made me kind of happy. I was like, oh, wow, I can pass. Yeah. So and I would always go as far as I could, with my very limited Spanish to communicate. Whereas I worked with some people, and if that happened, they would get really insulted. Um,
Yeah, my girlfriend in high school would slip into Tagalog sometimes.
uh-huh. Okay. That's all I've got. Thank you.
So there's something like 1.5 to 1.8 million Filipinos working in business process outsourcing. Just to give a sense, it's, over 3% of the labor force in the Philippines, which is pretty significant. Um, and Thank you for your kind words, Liz. I like to say, though, the guests make the party. So it's you guys that make the events special, and it's everyone sharing their opinions openly and honestly. I'm just the humble moderator and not always even that. So, um, yeah. Um, that said, if anyone has other questions, comments, concerns, I would love to hear other opinions. Someone actually asked if we could do a breakout session. We're getting to be a smaller group now, but I'm happy to do a breakout session if there's more interest from more than one person to do it. If anyone else wants to do breakout sessions, I can have I have to figure out how to do it.
I'm
'Cause
just confused on what we would break out to. Sorry to interrupt, Garrett.
Oh, so what it would do is, well, let me just do it, and I'm gonna let participants choose room. So what I'm gonna do is create two breakout rooms, and it'll just say room one and room two, and then if someone wants to go to a breakout room, they can go there, and so. Now there are breakout rooms, and if you go to the breakout rooms thing at the bottom, if you go to one of the breakout rooms, you can join. And all I would ask is that whoever's the first person to go to the breakout room be the moderator, and we can have people talk in smaller groups if they want to. So,
Sometimes it helps if you say, "Hey, I have this neat idea I want to talk about," and you let the room know, and then you say, I'm going to breakout room one," or just go and figure it out too there too.
I'm hoping that it'll be related to tonight's topic because that's what people came for. But the idea of the breakout rooms is to be able to have more time talking and getting to know each other at a deeper level. And so that's what my goal of having the breakout rooms is to be able to talk about this topic, but at a more in-depth
Garrett, if we could
level.
also just kind of have an understanding, how much longer is this meeting going on for, and how long will we be in a breakout room, and will we come back to the general discussion again?
So, I would say people can choose. Like, I'll leave them open until like probably 5 minutes before the end. So we may end early. Like, if we don't have other hands up, then we may end early tonight. But normally we go till 9 o'clock, and Sarah went to room one, so if anyone wants to join her in room one to have a like more offline chat in a smaller group, you're welcome to do that. And yeah, so um, but happy to play it by ear either way. So
I would suggest in the future, if you're going to do breakout rooms, to do it earlier so that
yeah,
people can, yeah, find the groove of the room. Sometimes, it takes a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes to kind of get a topic going and whatnot.
well, the intent is to have it be the same topic, just to be in a smaller group. Um,
Right.
so, but
Yeah, so it's not, you don't just step into it and immediately like
right.
sparks like there's
Yeah, no, I
chemistry
know what you
between
mean. I
people.
know what
Yeah,
you
yeah.
mean, and I did
I
mean
know.
to do it earlier, and I appreciate you writing me to remind me that I had said I was going to do it. I just forgot. I get focused on moderating and lose
Yeah.
track of all else, so including time usually. So until my kids come and tell me it's time to put them to bed. So
Fair enough. You're wearing a lot of hats.
I do. So um, cool. Any other questions, comments, concerns, things that people wanted to talk about?
Sorry, I had to step out. Was the question, anybody else wants to add any thoughts?
The floor is open, so anyone that has wants to speak up, feel free.
We continue talking about the why. And by the way, I just learned that the negative version of the golden rule is called the silver rule. So we could talk about the silver rule being superior to the platinum rule. But that is my
Well,
position.
you
However,
have
You're welcome to it. Win, go ahead.
okay.
Do we need to use the word superior?
no, we don't have to use the
It
word.
was a joke.
Yeah, no, I get it. Um, and but I bring up, I mean, the reason all this kind of like came to my mind was for what Ms. Barone was saying, because she did have a point that there's no way to know what a stranger would want, how a stranger would want to be treated. So I kind of agree with you, Garrett, that the platinum rule is a better ethical protocol when you're in intimate relationships, because you get to know them, you get to know how they want to be treated. In fact, I think my simple definition of love is treating others the way they want to be treated, right?
Mhm.
And putting their happiness ahead of yours in at that moment. So it is a valid rule, but it doesn't work in with strangers.
Right.
And that's the only problem I have with it. That's why I went back from
Did
it.
you
Yeah.
well, let me first see if Win has another a topic that you wanted to start.
Go ahead, Wayne.
Um, yeah, I had a normal topic. Yeah.
Oh,
Or like, normal comment, I guess.
yeah.
I I found, I've gone to some that are more conservative leaning and um, I think what was hard for me at some of these events is because gun culture is so strong, um, people can kind of push toward, like somebody said that, the liberals are very sensitive, and I can see that and appreciate where they're coming from, but from my perspective, enter conversations like this, it's the conservatives that are very sensitive around gun culture, that they'll say the word ammunition and this and that, and just kind of just these subtle ways to kind of reinforce that there's no conversation that should be allowed around it. And I actually am pretty conservatively founded in my views, even though I wouldn't call myself conservative anymore. And I definitely don't think we need to take away guns or anything like that. But there's this immediate defensiveness and cockiness sometimes I've experienced, which does kind of threaten my safety, because I don't think mainstream conservatives realize there's always someone more conservative than them. And there is real threat and danger for people out there. And there are real people that want Americans to die versus just say a pronoun. And I don't think they realize much extremes, not they necessarily, but like that the promotion of their views can come across as a threat to some people. And so um I think it's hard to have discussions in the current gun culture sometimes because of that defensiveness. You can't really delve into like, okay, what can regulation look like, or if there's insurance. Like you can't even get into a conversation because there's just like this strong cockiness, like almost like idolatry. So
Yeah.
that's my perspective. Not everyone's like that, but I'm just saying sometimes it's just those two or three people in an event that can create an attitude or this or that.
Yeah, and that's
So
part of what we want to avoid here in the FTI is to
yeah,
have a culture where certain ideas are considered, laughable or, and I will be honest, I've poked fun at the flat earthers a bunch of times. I try to use that as the example so that I don't poke fun at anyone that's like more than like 0.1% of the population, right? But like even that I probably shouldn't, quite frankly, because I did try to listen to understand a flat earther once, and I'll never get those 40 minutes back. So, but I do think, I mean, I was curious, like, how did someone come to that conclusion? I think you're right that the times that I've tried to engage on gun control stuff, conservatives tend to be very, very solid that any kind of gun control is bad gun control, and that kind of shuts down the conversation, and it doesn't create a safe space for brave conversations if all conversation is just completely closed off. Then you don't feel this reciprocal nature that I talked about in the beginning, where if we all show that our mind is open, then other people will reciprocate that open-mindedness. The very opposite is true too. If everyone shows closed-mindedness, that kind of shuts everyone's minds off. And that's where, I think the the way to try to get around that is the asking open-ended questions, which is where if we don't have more hands up, I'm going to try to go with Carl on the silver and platinum rule is like asking open-ended questions to understand why people are so closed off. Because with gun control, I've heard things like limit magazine capacity, right? And I couldn't imagine, like, do you really need 30 bullets to shoot a deer, or is like 8 bullets enough to shoot a deer? And you miss the first time, the deer's going to run off. So you don't need a fully automatic rifle to shoot a deer, right? And hunting, like hunting anything other than humans doesn't require large magazines. And so maybe bears, but I don't know, I can imagine a bear withstanding some bullets. I think they can. So I could see it there because I wouldn't want to be changing magazines then. But then you come into situations like, well, what about people who getting mental health checks for people getting guns? And a lot of conservatives are against that as well. And it's like, wait, but don't we want to know that someone doesn't have a mental health situation, in order to buy a gun? And so, you know, I guess there, you know, that's where, like, when I talked about gun control in the FTI, I went back to, I think that the place we should go is just uh um the like getting more mental health help for more people, because I would argue 100%, I'm going to make the bold claim, I haven't researched this exactly, but I'm going to make the bold claim that 100% of people causing significant unnecessary harm with guns are because of mental health issues, right? One way, shape, or form. And I think it's actually kind of tautologically true, because just the very fact that someone is shooting innocent people with a gun means that they have a mental health problem, like by definition, by very definition. So I don't even think it's a bold claim. I think it should be obvious. And so let's get everybody the mental health help that they need, and make them feel supported and cared about, and help make sure there's someone to listen to them, so that their story gets heard and they get understood better, and that someone can ask them thoughtful questions to understand where they're coming from to get them to a better headspace, so that we don't have those types of problems. Because and this is where, like, I do think, like, um that's probably the best way of tackling the gun situation, because there are other countries that have guns that don't have the types of problems that we have. And I would argue that's because they probably have nationalized medicine, and people can get counselors when they need it. And so people get the mental health coverage that they need when they need it. So,
Heard that. I'm not sure if this is correct or not, but I heard that in Switzerland, every citizen must own a gun in case there's a war and you have to rise up. But bullets are illegal. Nobody gets bullets until there's a reason to get bullets in order to use your gun.
That's interesting.
I think is a really good
wait,
law,
say it
actually.
again. Say it again.
So,
Sorry.
so everybody's required to have a gun but it's not for protection. It's for in case you get called on to go to the army or whatever, or that you need to rise up in the militias or something like that. So just like the United States is the right to bear arms, I believe that in Switzerland it's like like you have to have a gun, but you don't have the bullets. and you only get the bullets when you need them, basically, which
Got it.
means that they really have very low, and then of course in Australia, it only took one mass shooting event to basically get the guns out of the population, and they haven't had one since. So I think that's also a good rule. By the way, if you really, really, you know, p poke at the language of the Second Amendment, it basically says that we have the right to T-shirts, bear arms. It's not to have
T-shirts?
guns. Yeah, the right to bear arms.
He's making
Oh,
a joke.
It was never meant to have guns. Yes, that's my position as a
tank top.
pacifist. Yeah. So, Garrett,
Um,
let me ask you, how do you think Donald J. Trump wants to be treated by others?
I think he wants to be told he's right 100% of the time. And I think that if like I think but I think that I don't know because I don't know him intimately, right? I only know him through public media. We're not good friends. Surprise, surprise. And we probably won't ever be. Um
No, you probably guess that it probably would not be you would not basically use the platinum rule with him. I
so
would think.
So you're right. I probably wouldn't use the platinum rule with him, but I think that I do think that deep down he while his actions say otherwise, I think if you were a trusted friend of his and asked him, do you want to do you want to know what's true? Or do you want like I think he would say yes. I think he would. I think he genuinely believes the things that he says. I think he's bought in. He's drinking his own Kool-Aid. I don't think he necessarily wants everyone to tell him he's right just to tell him he's right. I think he thinks he's right because he thinks he's right 100% of the time, and he legitimately believes that. And since he was a young child, everybody around him that told him he was wrong was told they were wrong. And so he's just kind of become accustomed to being perfect. And so he's that person that I was talking about that, it has no bias because they're completely unaware of their own bias. And, but I think that if I were to treat him the way that he wants to be treated, I think he would want to know the truth. He just wouldn't accept it if I told it to him. And I have said it. He just doesn't care about me or know who I am or listen to it. I've said it on YouTube, but he just doesn't subscribe to our channel. I don't know why not. But Donald, hit subscribe, Donald.
I
Like
think
press subscribe on the YouTube channel.
he goes beyond, and pretty much every single person who suffers from narcissistic personality disorder should also not be used with the platinum rule either, because they want to be aggrandized and fawned over and all that stuff, which is not
Well,
healthy.
so remember the platinum rule. The platinum rule itself is very flawed, right? Because the platinum rule says if you tell me, Carl, you say, Garrett, give me all your net worth tomorrow, the platinum rule says I should give it to you. But remember what I said is the modified platinum rule.
Right.
Treat other people the way they want to be treated unless there's a good reason not to. And with Donald Trump, I would have a good reason not to treat him the way he wants to be treated because that's not what he needs. And I know better what he needs than he knows for himself. And I'm
He
going to
just
make
needs
that
a
bold
hug.
claim.
He just needs a hug.
He probably does need a lot of hugs, to be honest. He's probably not getting them from his wife right now. So, um, but
iPhone 16
I do
E.
I do think that that minor addition, which is my own addition, by the way, that's not part of the platinum rule. The if unless there's a good reason not to is my own addition. And I do think that makes it pretty foolproof. Like, treat other people the way they want to be treated unless there's a good reason not to.
And
Um,
again, I think the position is that it works, but only in intimate circles, not with the whole population.
yeah. I hear you. I just think that when you're following the negative golden rule, you are presuming that no one wants the negative things that you don't want. And so you're saying, I'm going to treat this person by not acting towards them the way I don't want to act, I don't want to be acted towards because I
Right.
don't know any better. And so I'm going to treat them the way that I think they want to be treated, which is to not be abused, right? And so you're essentially following the modified platinum rule without calling it that. You're just calling it something else, but really you're treating them the way that you think they want to be treated. Love you. Um, iPhone 16e. I don't know your name because all I see is iPhone 16e.
I think you need to unmute him.
They can unmute themselves now, I think. But
Oh, okay.
yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So, yeah, but with the people that you don't know, what's wrong with the original rule that you should treat people the way you would like to be treated?
I
I
think
mean,
it's a
because
good
you
general
can't know.
rule. Like it's lasted the test of 2000 something years, right? It's a good general rule. It's across all religions. I think the golden rule is a good rule. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying, I think it takes it up a notch to say once you get to know someone and that you should, I think that it should be on all of us. I did tell this to one group of people and they said, you know what? Platinum rule sounds like too much trouble. I have to get to know what people want. And I'm like, yeah, like we should get to know what other people want. We should treat them the way they want to be treated. That's what being a good human being is. It's understanding what other people want and what they need. And if, in the case of someone that's like a severe narcissist, to Carl's point, then what they need is not what they want. And you should treat them the way that they should be treated, rather than the way they want to be treated, because there's a sort of a more important priority coming, which is seeking truth and being fair, which is part of the first intention. But um, I don't think the golden rule is bad. I just think the modified platinum rule, takes it up a notch, especially with as you get to know people better. And I think that there aren't enough people spending enough time getting to know each other better at a very deep level. And as we get to know people at a deeper level, there's always going to be times where you conflict, right? Carl and I usually agree about a lot of stuff, but we disagreed about the modified platinum rule and the reverse golden rule today, the silver rule, apparently it's called. I didn't know that one. I've heard the negative golden rule though. Um, but but then what you have to be able to do is recover from that and not have it hurt the overall relationship. And that's part of what we do as members of the Free Thinker Institute, where we have our weekly events, and we get to know each other at a very deep and profound level. And we accept each other for being, different, but still, learning from each other and getting to know each other at a deep level and treating each other very respectfully. And so that's part of what being an FTI member is about. And I'm gonna do a
Well, no, I totally agree with that. I was just thinking about people that you don't really know.
yeah.
Um,
And
but
then you
yes,
can
of
only
course.
presume, right? And that's where the golden rule is also essentially following the platinum rule, because when you don't know someone, you say, well, if I want to be treated that way, I'm going to presume that that person wants to be treated that way, so I'm going to treat them that way. But, in the example of like, my example of Spanish, right? Like speaking Spanish, like it's pretty clear that like not everybody here wants me to speak Spanish to them, so I shouldn't speak Spanish. So the platinum rule sort of trumps the golden rule, right? And
Yeah.
so there are certain situations where the platinum rule is clearly a better option, the modified platinum rule, than the golden rule.
Okay. And also for what it's worth about the gun, uh, gun regulation.
Yeah.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts about that, but you know, it's probably way too objectionable to other people. But yeah,
That's
I
why we
mean,
have a safe, brave space. Feel free
yeah.
to share your opinion. Like you're welcome to share it no matter what it is.
Well, the whole thing. I mean, I don't believe in our interpretation of the Second Amendment. Um, I read it literally for what it's worth, that it is something that was made in the absence of a standing militia. Um, and you know, uh, uh, people who have been talking about mental health for the past 50 years are just liars, I guess, because I don't see them doing anything about it. And, so I don't see how you can just allow everybody
wants to buy a gun and buy as many as they want. Um, any kind of gun that they want. I mean, why can't they buy a tank then? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, I know it's a cliche, but when the Constitution was written, that would mean that everybody would be entitled to a musket. So,
Right.
it's just ludicrous.
And it does say a well-regulated militia being
Yes.
necessary to the security of a free state, which is
Hmm.
basically talking about a militia.
Right.
The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, which basically is saying that the right to bear arms is as a part of a well-regulated militia. Well, we no
Right.
longer have well-regulated militias, and if you look at the militias that exist, they were the ones that tried to overthrow the U.S. government and then got pardoned after basically committing treason.
Yeah, but you're saying you're equating a militia to a standing army. I mean, I interpret militia as a standing army.
Yeah,
Militia, the way you were talking about it, is an organization
no,
of
you're right. You're
people.
right. And I was meaning it that way, but I conflated two things.
Oh,
I was talking about how the right to bear arms is now being used by people who tried to overthrow the US government.
of course.
Whereas really what the idea of the Second Amendment was to to secure a free state, meaning because at the time, like the way that America got our independence, if we all recall, is by having average citizens, be able to pick up a gun and shoot, the redcoats in the forest and then run away and not get found. Like we were playing, kind of unfair war tactics, what the British considered unfair war tactics. I'm using their term and listening to understand there. And so it was the well-regulated militias that got our independence from the Brits in the first place. So the whole idea of the right to bear arms, I don't think is today being interpreted the way that it was originally meant to be. But, again, I do think that it becomes a very sensitive topic when you talk to a conservative about the right to bear arms. They have reimagined it, which I find very interesting because the conservatives are supposed to be the originalists and trying to channel the
Yeah,
original
sure.
intent,
Yeah, sure.
right? But then come on, let's face it, would the original intent of the Constitution say that giving money is free speech? I think it would be
Yeah,
really hard to argue that that's
yeah.
true.
There's
So
so many examples. It's
yeah.
just so ridiculous, and they're
I don't
just
want
being
to,
disingenuous.
yeah. I do think that there's a certain amount of people. So I tell my kids it's more important to want what's fair than to want what you want. Because
Mhm.
wanting what you want is just egotism. It's like, well, I want it and therefore I should get it.
That's right.
No,
Yeah,
you should want what's fair. And I
right.
think there are a lot of people in America that want what they want and they're getting it right now. And that scares a lot of the rest of us because the there is a slippery slope that's really going on where, our democracy could, viably have an end to it. And there's already Congress people calling for an end to the amendment to limit presidential terms to 2 terms. And
Yeah.
that's scary territory, right? Now, that said, Alan has his hand up and we only have 2 more minutes, so
Okay.
I'm gonna ask the guys to come back. Um, Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, I'm just in our discussions about when you're in conversations with people who think differently. I think a lot of it really also depends on where with who you're speaking with fall on the personality traits.
Hmm.
Like, are they genuinely open to other things? And you even brought up the point, which is kind of like with me. If someone, I was talking with a guy I know, he's a flat Earth guy, and he started going on about. It. He's asking me about, like, he's asking me about what I think of this, and showing me videos and this and then, and I mean, with some of the topics, at some point you're like, oh my goodness, I like. I don't want to go here anymore. Again, right? I mean, and you know, and then we get into the gun control thing. And I'm a Canadian, right? And I think the most fascinating thing about the arguments in the States are this subject is a universe into itself in the States. I mean, it has the rest of the world looks inside the fishbowl and goes, what the fuck is going on? Like, what is this? What is going on? You got mass shootings continually, kid, right? And I mean, I know we talked about some Charlie Kirk stuff, but I mean, I saw that quote of his about, I mean, there's, these are just a consequence of having a freedom. And I've heard the argument of those are people just abusing their freedom to have a gun. It's like, what? And I mean, when you look at it from the outside in, I mean, it just looks like madness.
Yeah.
It's like, how did you get to these arguments? Like, how did you come to these positions?
This is why listening to understand is so important, Alan, because if you ask someone the right questions, they will see the holes in their own argument if they have any kind of open mind whatsoever. And for me, like if I ask those questions and I get to a point where I really clearly understand where that person is coming from, and they simply have like fallacious logic, like logic that just makes no sense, then at that point I'm done, right? I understood their perspective. They don't see the flaws in their own logic, even when I ask thoughtful questions. And then if I can do it right, and I usually push it further than this, but if I can do it right, I can end the conversation peacefully and politely. But usually I will ask, tighter and tighter questions until it becomes really clear that, you know,
Yeah.
there's no logic to their logic. And if I do that, then sometimes they get upset, right? But I
Yeah.
would rather,
Yeah.
confirm beyond a shadow of a doubt that this person has absolutely no open mind, rather than just assume that they, have a.
Yeah, and well, I've said my when I speak with people, sometimes I don't care what they believe; it's how they believe. That's what you want to get to the root of. Is how did you come? How did you
Yeah.
come to this? And
How did they come to that conclusion?
that is what gets you to know a person better. Is the how, right?
Yeah.
The what sometimes is insignificant, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it isn't, but it is, right? I mean, it's the how they
It's the
got there. Then
surface
you know
level.
then you know whether that it's someone you want to continue to interact with.
Yeah, and it's the surface level, and I think so often political conversations never delve past the surface. That's why listening to understand is so important, because it lets you dig deeper as to the whys. Why do they have that opinion? Why do they believe that guns are sacred? Why is that well-regulated militia mean a person at home with their gun that's not regulated at all? Right? And it does say the right of people to keep and bear arms, but it says as part of a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state. And so how do you get everybody should be allowed to have a gun, like when there's no well-regulated militia anymore? I'm gonna try to go really quickly, like less than 30 seconds for Sarah and Win, because I want to let you guys speak. But I gotta close down and get my kids to bed.
Okay, I'll go fast. Stephen just brought up, he told me to call him Stephen. That's why I'm not saying Dr. DeLuca.
That's fine. I should have done the same. He asked me to use it, but I see his name there, and
yeah, that's Garrett. Isn't that the platinum rule?
Yeah.
Anyways, this is literally the point, or he brought up a really good point about the platinum rule that I thought was really interesting is what if there's a circumstance where somebody, and maybe he can elaborate on this too, what if there's a circumstance where somebody they want to be treated a certain way, but you don't agree with the way, like your ethical standards go against.
That's why the modification that I add to it is important, which is unless there's a good reason not to. And so I say treat other people the way they want to be treated unless there's a good reason not to. So
I
if
didn't know
your
you had a
ethics don't align with
Yeah.
it, then you say, you know what, I'm not going to treat you that way because I know better and that's not the way that I should be treating you. which was to,
Okay.
Carl asked that question while you guys were in the breakout room. Well, what about Donald Trump? He wants you to tell him he's right all the time. And if I met Donald Trump, I wouldn't tell him he's right because I would have a good reason not to. I want him to get closer to truth. And so I would try to ask thoughtful questions to try to help him realize why that he's wrong. I'm not going to say you're wrong because I know that's not a winning strategy, but yeah, that's
Okay.
that's why
I
He'll
didn't know
turn
you
you
had
off and not
a.
talk to you.
that's
No,
my own modification to the platinum rule,
Okay.
by the way.
I
That's
didn't know
my
you had
addition.
that.
It's not part of
and
the platinum rule itself.
Right.
if
Perfect.
I can,
Okay.
if I could just kind of chime in very briefly,
Sure.
and that the point that I was making too is that we may have cultural differences, and sometimes I've seen where a cultural defense is used that could be a violation of people's rights here, even though they might assert that it's a cultural thing for them from the country that they come from. But when you come here, people that you interact with, they don't give up their rights here just because your culture is different. And so we don't always have to accommodate their point of view if it's contrary to what we think is an important core value here.
See, I didn't quite follow that, Stephen. I'm sorry.
I'm just saying that the example that I was using with Sarah in the breakout room was sometimes, for example, someone would use a cultural defense to a criminal case, saying we did it because where I grew up in my country, that's according to our culture. Well, if
Right,
it's a violation of norms here in the United States, it's not a defense, it's not a legitimate defense here. You don't get to impose your culture here if it breaks a core value here that we value.
right.
So that's where I would take where I would find an exception where treating you the way you want to be treated or giving your culture a higher value than what we hold core to our beliefs here, like
Well, the
protecting
platinum
women and
rule
children and things like that.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
platinum rule is not intended to create laws per se. The fourth intention is intended to be where laws get driven, which is that we should prevent significant unnecessary harm from happening to all human beings, full stop. And so that's where I would argue the law should step in to prevent significant unnecessary harm from happening to anyone. The platinum rule, I think, is just a good general guideline to like, if you had to simplify all of
Right.
like
We're not asking you to justify your platinum rule. We're just explaining what our discussion was in the
Yeah.
breakout room.
No, no, that's fine. Yeah, I was just explaining that the platinum rule is intended to be if you had to like live by one rule and one rule alone, then that's,
Right.
the
And
bad
the
one,
law
but
is meant there as a backdrop to say, all right, you can't go this far with
right.
your insisting that we agree with you or treat you in a certain way because it breaks something that's really a core value for us here.
That's why I have the modification, which is
Right.
unless there's a good reason not to. And if in your case there you would have a good reason not to treat that person with their cultural norm because they're violating a US law. So you would have a good reason not to treat them that way. Um, Win,
Um, so yeah, since we just want to keep it quick and just a
please.
quick comment, the gun thing, it's also very backwards, in terms of logic for me that they're so sensitive that they can be very sensitive around the area of taking away guns, but then they seem like a very high percentage of immediately on board for taking away guns from transgenders, which is digging right into the Second Amendment.
Right.
Like it sounded like a lot of hypocrisy.
Well,
So
that's where you'll look at the conservative mantra is free speech, right? But actually, I have a family member that writes grants for their organization. Well, they were told that they had to rewrite their grant to take out all mentions of DEI, of equity, of a whole bunch of other stuff. And this is a level of government bureaucracy heretofore unknown in grant writers' world. And now, literally, every single grant for the entire US government has to be censored based on Donald Trump's insistence that DEI be removed from all grants in all shapes and forms. And so now we have government censorship by the very party that claims that they're pro free speech. And what they really mean when they say free speech is free speech for our opinions, censorship for everybody else. And I'll tell you, I've been censored quite a bit on Facebook, which is now Zuckerberg with a tech bro, and he's right in the Trump camp. And I get censored whenever I say anything that doesn't fit their narrative. And, as an independent, I often don't fit their narrative. And so it's problematic when you have to realize if you're following someone and they're hypocritical, you can't trust a hypocrite because they will throw you under the bus as soon as they get the chance if it's in their best interest. So that's why I think seeking truth and being fair is far more important than winning and wanting what you want. All right, K Barone, real quick. I gotta go. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I just wanted to say that actually I think that your example of speaking Spanish and then opting not to is actually reflective of you following the golden rule. And the reason is because you yourself have expressed that you want to be inclusive, you would want to be included in things. And obviously, you know that the advertisement is in English, so you know that the people attending understand English. And in fact, it is actually the golden rule in itself because it's treating others the way you want to be treated. You want to be included, so you're going to treat others to be included.
Well, in some respects, the way that I'm following the golden rule is by following the platinum rule because the way that I want to be treated is I want people to treat me the way I want to be treated. So I'm going to treat everyone else the way that I think they want to be treated. So, yes, by following the platinum rule, I am also following the golden rule because I'm treating you guys the way that I would want to be treated, which is to follow the platinum rule. So now we're getting all conflated and confused, but that's where for me the platinum rule is the simplest way to remember it is to just try to understand people and be nice to them, right? Like treat them the way that they want to be treated unless there's a good reason not to, and that will steer you right 99% of the time. But yeah, being a good human being is very important. And so I appreciate all of you good human beings for coming, for your comments and questions and your feedback. And I hope to see you guys next week. Michael Strasberg next week is going to give a talk on oral health because he is a periodontist, which is like the doctor of dentists. And so he's got some really good stuff to share. So please come. I won't be able to be here next week, but I will be back the week after. I have a family obligation next week. So thanks, everybody, and hope everybody has a great night. And thanks again. Bye bye.